Before you sleep tonight, pause for a moment. There's a reason this message found you right now. Maybe your day felt ordinary. Maybe it felt heavy. Maybe your mind is still full of thoughts you haven't spoken to anyone about. But before you close your eyes tonight, there is something you need to hear. Not tomorrow, not someday, tonight. Because sometimes the quiet moments at the end of the day are the only time our hearts are still enough to notice what God has been trying to show us all along. You may not have realized it, but lately, something inside you has been shifting. Small questions appearing in your mind, a quiet awareness that something in your life needs attention. Maybe you've tried to ignore it. Maybe you told yourself you're just tired, or overthinking, or that you'll deal with it later. But the truth is, some feelings don't appear randomly. Sometimes they are invitations. Invitations to slow down. Invitations to look honestly at the direction your life is moving. And tonight, before you sleep, is one of those moments. Because when the world gets quiet, it becomes easier to hear the things that matter most. This message isn't meant to pressure you. It's meant to help you pause, to breathe, and to notice what your heart may have been trying to tell you for a long time. So, before this day ends, listen carefully. Because what you recognize tonight may quietly change how tomorrow begins.
Right now, before anything else, I want you to notice something simple. You are still here. You could have scrolled away. You could have ignored this moment the way people ignore so many quiet invitations during the day. But you didn't. And that matters more than you realize, because moments like this, small, quiet, almost easy to overlook, are often where awareness begins. Not loud awareness, not dramatic change, just the gentle realization that something inside you has been asking for attention. You may not have words for it yet. Maybe it feels like restlessness. Maybe it feels like a quiet discomfort that appears when everything around you finally slows down. Or maybe it feels like a question that keeps returning, no matter how busy you stay. Why does something feel unfinished? Why does something inside you feel like it's waiting for you to notice it? These are not strange questions. They are human ones. And they often appear when life has been moving so quickly that your deeper thoughts haven't had room to surface. All day long, we move from one thing to the next. Work, conversations, notifications, responsibilities. And in the middle of all that movement, it becomes easy to live on the surface of our lives instead of listening to what is happening underneath. But nighttime is different. When the day slows down, the mind becomes quieter. And in that quiet, things that were hidden during the day begin to show themselves. Thoughts return. Feelings become clearer. Questions feel harder to ignore. You may have noticed that recently. Moments when you were alone, and your mind didn't immediately rush to the next distraction. Moments where you felt something deeper than the usual noise of the day. That feeling is not something you need to be afraid of. In fact, it's often the beginning of something good, because awareness is where clarity begins. And clarity is where direction starts to change. You don't need to rush ahead tonight. You don't need to solve every question you have. Right now, the most important thing is simply this. You are paying attention. And that is the first step many people never take. So stay here for a moment. Let the quiet do its work. Because sometimes the most important shifts in our lives don't begin with big decisions. They begin with a simple moment like this. When we finally stop long enough to listen. Right now, before anything else, I want you to notice something simple. You are still here. You could have scrolled away. You could have ignored this moment the way people ignore so many quiet invitations during the day. But you didn't. And that matters. Something interesting happens when you finally slow down. At first, the silence can feel unfamiliar. All day long, your mind has been moving, solving problems, responding to people, thinking about what needs to happen next. And when that constant motion suddenly stops, it can feel almost uncomfortable. But if you stay with the quiet for a moment, something begins to change. Your thoughts start becoming clearer, not louder, just clearer. You begin to notice things that were already inside you, waiting patiently for your attention. A memory you've been avoiding, a decision you've been delaying, a feeling you pushed aside because it was easier to stay busy and to face it. Many people spend years running from these moments, not because they're weak, but because they're afraid that if they slow down, they might discover something they don't want to confront. But here's the truth. Most people eventually realize avoiding awareness doesn't remove it, it only postpones it. And sooner or later, life creates a quiet space where the questions return. Not to punish you, not to overwhelm you, but to invite honesty. You may have noticed that invitation recently. Maybe during a drive when the music stopped and your mind started wandering. Maybe late at night when the house was quiet and you suddenly became aware of how tired your heart felt. Or maybe in a moment where something small happened and it affected you more deeply than you expected. Those moments are not interruptions. They are signals. Signals that something in your life is asking for attention, not because everything is wrong, but because something important is ready to be noticed. Sometimes it's a direction that needs to change. Sometimes it's a burden you've been carrying too long. Sometimes it's simply the realization that you've been moving through life on autopilot, and your soul is asking you to wake up. That kind of awareness doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives quietly. And tonight may be one of those quiet moments. You don't have to force anything right now. You don't have to make a decision tonight. But you can do one simple thing. You can be honest with yourself about what you've been feeling, about what you've been avoiding, about what your heart has been trying to say while the rest of life kept you distracted. Because honesty is where real clarity begins. And clarity slowly opens the door to peace. Something now that you're sitting with this quiet moment, something else becomes possible. You can begin to ask yourself a question that many people avoid for a long time. Not a complicated question, just an honest one. What has your heart been trying to tell you lately? Sometimes the answer isn't obvious at first, because for a long time you may have learned how to move forward without asking deeper questions. You handled responsibilities. You showed up for the people around you. You kept going, even when things inside you felt unclear. And from the outside, that can look like strength. But strength without reflection can slowly become exhaustion. You may have felt that recently. Moments where even normal things start feeling heavier than they should. Small problems feel bigger. Decisions feel harder. And even when nothing dramatic is happening, something inside you feels unsettled. That kind of restlessness often has a message hidden inside it. Not a message of fear, a message of attention. Because sometimes restlessness is simply your heart noticing that the direction you've been moving in no longer feels aligned with who you truly are. And when that realization begins, it can feel confusing at first. You might ask yourself questions like, why do I feel this way? Why does something feel different lately? Why does it feel like I'm being asked to slow down and look at things more carefully? Those questions are not problems. They are invitations. Invitations to reconnect with the deeper part of yourself that often gets ignored during busy seasons of life. The part of you that wants meaning, the part of you that wants honesty, the part of you that knows your life is meant to move with purpose, not just motion. And when that part of you begins to speak again, the first thing it usually asks for is simple: attention. Not perfection, not immediate answers, just attention. So tonight, instead of rushing past this moment, allow yourself to stay present in it. Let the questions come without trying to silence them. Let your thoughts settle without pushing them away. Because the truth is, awareness like this rarely appears without a reason. And the fact that you're noticing it, the moment you begin paying attention to what's happening inside you, something subtle begins to change. You stop running on autopilot. You begin to notice the direction of your life instead of simply moving through it. Most people spend years reacting to life instead of observing it. They respond to pressure, to expectations, to responsibilities, and slowly, without realizing it, they stop asking themselves deeper questions. Not because they don't care, but because life moves fast. And when life moves fast enough, reflection feels like a luxury. But the truth is, reflection is not a luxury. It's how we realign ourselves. Because when you pause long enough to look honestly at your life, you begin to notice things that were invisible before. Patterns, habits, choices you've repeated without thinking about them. Some of those patterns may have helped you for a long time. They protected you. They helped you survive difficult seasons. They helped you move forward when things were uncertain. But sometimes the same patterns that once protected you can quietly begin to limit you. You may notice that certain habits no longer bring peace the way they once did. Certain distractions don't feel satisfying anymore. Certain ways of thinking feel heavier than they used to. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. Often it means something inside you is growing. Growth doesn't always feel comfortable. In fact, growth often begins with a sense of uneasiness, a quiet awareness that something in your life is ready to change, not suddenly, not dramatically, but intentionally. That awareness may be what you're feeling right now. The realization that continuing exactly the same way may not be what your heart truly wants anymore. And that realization can feel both unsettling and hopeful at the same time. Unsettling, because change asks for courage. Hopeful, because change also opens the door to a different kind of peace. You don't have to rush into any answers tonight. Right now, the most important step is simply this: you are willing to notice what is happening inside you. And that willingness is where meaningful change always begins. At this point, you might notice something interesting. The more you allow yourself to sit with these thoughts, the less overwhelming they become. At first, awareness can feel heavy. When you realize that something in your life needs attention, your mind may immediately start asking big questions. What should I change? Where should I go next? What if I make the wrong decision? But growth rarely begins with big answers. It usually begins with small honesty, just acknowledging what you already feel inside. You don't need to force clarity tonight. You don't need to solve your entire life before you go to sleep. But you can recognize one simple truth. Something inside you is asking to be taken seriously. And that voice has likely been quiet for a long time. Not silent, just quiet. Quiet because life kept moving. Quiet because responsibilities demanded your attention. Quiet because it felt easier to focus on what needed to be done today than to think about deeper questions. But quiet does not mean unimportant. In fact, the quietest voices in our lives are often the most important ones. The voice that asks whether you are living in alignment with what truly matters to you. The voice that reminds you when your life begins drifting away from what brings real peace. The voice that notices when you are carrying things that were never meant to stay with you this long. Ignoring that voice may work for a while, but eventually, it finds a way to return. Often in moments like this, late at night, when everything slows down, when distractions fade, when your mind finally has space to breathe. Tonight might be one of those moments. A moment where your life gently asks for your attention. Not your fear, not your pressure, just your attention. Because when you give your life honest attention, something powerful begins to happen. You start recognizing what truly deserves your energy and what has quietly been draining it. And once you begin seeing that difference, the next steps of your journey slowly become clearer. At this point, you might notice something interesting. The more when clarity begins to appear, even in small ways, something inside you starts to relax. Not because everything is suddenly solved, but because you are no longer avoiding what needs attention. Avoidance creates tension, honesty creates space, and that space allows you to breathe again. You may begin to notice that the heaviness you once felt was not only about circumstances. Sometimes it was about carrying questions that never had room to be explored. Questions about direction. Questions about purpose. Questions about whether the way you've been living truly reflects the person you want to become. These questions can feel intimidating at first, but they are not enemies. They are guides. They show you where your heart is asking for alignment. For many people, the hardest part of growth is not change itself. It's admitting the change may be needed. Because admitting that means letting go of the comfort of staying exactly the same. And comfort can be very persuasive. Comfort tells you to keep things familiar. Comfort tells you that tomorrow can always be the day you start paying attention. Comfort tells you that ignoring a quiet feeling is easier than listening to it. But deep down, most people know when comfort is quietly holding them in place. You may have felt that tension before. The tension between what is easy and what is true. The tension between staying where you are and becoming who you sense you are meant to be. That tension does not mean you are lost. It means you are becoming aware. Awareness is the moment when your life stops drifting and starts choosing direction again. And direction is powerful. Even a small shift in direction can slowly transform where your life leads. Tonight, you are not being asked to make dramatic changes. You are simply being invited to notice something important. You have the ability to choose the direction. As you begin to think about direction, another realization often follows. You start noticing that your life has been shaped by many small choices. Not one big decision, not one dramatic moment, but thousands of small responses over time. The things you paid attention to, the habits you repeated, the thoughts you allowed to guide you. Little by little, those choices created the direction you are currently walking in. And the same is true for the future. Your life rarely changes because of one sudden event. It changes because of small shifts in awareness that slowly influence your daily actions. That idea can feel empowering, but also a little uncomfortable because it reminds us that we are not as powerless as we sometimes believe. There are parts of life we cannot control. Unexpected challenges, circumstances we never planned for, moments that arrive without warning. But there are also parts of life that remain within our influence. The way we respond, the direction we choose to move, the honesty we allow ourselves to have. When you begin to recognize that, something inside you begins to strengthen. Instead of feeling like life is simply happening to you, you begin to understand that your awareness plays a role in shaping what comes next. Not in a perfect way, but in a meaningful way. And that realization often leads to a quiet question. If my direction is shaped by small choices, what kind of choices do I want to begin making now? Not tomorrow, not someday in the distant future, but starting with the small moments that appear in front of me each day. You don't need to answer that question fully tonight, but letting the question exist is important. Because questions like that slowly open the door to a different kind of life. A life where you are not only reacting to circumstances, but participating in the direction your life takes. By now, you may notice something quietly changing inside you. The questions that once felt uncomfortable are starting to feel meaningful. Not because they are easy, but because they are honest. And honesty has a way of clearing the fog that confusion creates. When you begin living with this kind of awareness, you start seeing your life differently. You stop measuring everything by how fast things are moving. Instead, you begin paying attention to whether the direction feels right. For many people, this realization comes slowly. At first, they think life is about doing more, achieving more, keeping up with what everyone else around them seems to be doing. But eventually, something deeper becomes clear. Peace rarely comes from doing more. Peace comes from alignment, from knowing that your actions, your values, and your direction are no longer pulling you in opposite directions. When those things begin to come together, life feels different. You still face challenges. You still experience uncertainty. But there is less inner conflict. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're moving with intention. And that kind of movement creates a quiet strength. Not the kind that needs attention, not the kind that needs to prove anything. Just the kind of strength that comes from knowing you are walking in a direction that feels honest. Tonight may simply be the moment where that awareness begins. You don't need to rush the journey. You don't need to force every answer. But you can recognize this moment for what it is. A moment where you paused long enough to notice your life again. And sometimes, that single pause becomes the turning point that changes everything that follows. Now that you've reached this moment of awareness, something important begins to happen. You stop looking for answers outside of yourself first. Instead, you begin listening to the quiet wisdom that has always been present within you. Many people spend years searching for direction in noise, advice from too many voices, opinions from people who don't truly understand their path, expectations that slowly pull them away from what their heart already knows. But the truth is, real direction often begins in silence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence where your thoughts finally settle enough to hear what has been waiting underneath them. You may begin noticing that some things in your life are already becoming clear. Certain habits that no longer feel right. Certain distractions that once felt exciting but now feel empty. Certain priorities that suddenly seem more important than they used to. This is how clarity grows. Slowly, quietly, without dramatic announcements. And the more you pay attention to these small signals, the easier it becomes to recognize what truly belongs in your life and what does not. You start protecting your time more carefully. You start choosing where your energy goes. You begin moving toward things that bring meaning instead of simply filling space. That shift doesn't happen overnight, but every moment of awareness strengthens it. Tonight, you may not feel like everything has changed, and that's okay. The purpose of this moment was never to force immediate transformation. It was simply to open a door to honesty, a door to reflection, a door to the realization that your life is not meant to be lived unconsciously. You are meant to notice it, to participate in it, to guide it with intention. And once that awareness appears, it rarely disappears again. Because once you see your life clearly, you begin living it differently. As you sit with everything that has come up in this quiet moment, something gentle becomes clear. Nothing dramatic has happened tonight. No sudden answers, no loud revelations. And yet, something inside you has shifted. You paused. You listened. You allowed yourself to become aware of what has been quietly asking for your attention. That alone is powerful. Because most people rush past these moments. They distract themselves. They tell themselves they will think about it later. They fill the silence before it can say anything meaningful. But you stayed here long enough to notice. And noticing is where change always begins. The truth is, your life does not transform in one night. It transforms through the direction you choose to walk tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Small choices, small adjustments, small moments of honesty. Those are the things that slowly shape the path ahead of you. Tonight was not about solving everything. It was about remembering something simple. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to reflect. You are allowed to choose a direction that feels honest to your heart. And the quiet awareness you felt tonight does not have to disappear when you wake up tomorrow. You can carry it with you, in the way you think, in the way you respond, in the way you choose what deserves your attention. So before you sleep tonight, hold on to one simple realization. Your life is not just something that happens to you. It is something you participate in, and every moment of awareness brings you closer to the kind of life that feels real, intentional, and aligned with who you truly are. Rest now, because sometimes the most meaningful shifts in life begin not with noise, but with a quiet moment of listening.